This is Brad Kohler.
My name is Will Zazarowski.
I'm Byron Ryan.
This is Clint Eller, and I have entered the Flex Zone.
Entering the Flex Zone this week, I'll be interviewing a woman that believes life is an adventure. My guest has always had a hunger for knowledge, and her competitive fires burn deep as she's been featured on American Ninja Warrior, Tough Mudder X, and Broken Skull Challenge, to name a few. My guest is an author, published model of fitness, athlete, host, and entrepreneur with her online fitness business, www.skfitlife.com. Stephanie Siraco, you have entered the Flex Zone. How you doing today, Stephanie?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
You have a great story. I looked on your website, stephaniesiraco.com, and there's a lot of information on there, and you have a great journey to share with the Flex Zone fanatics. But from the outside looking in, some might think that your life has been all roses and daffodils, but that hasn't always been the case. Let's go back in time and talk about growing up in a log house.
So yeah, I grew up in rural Missouri in a log house that my parents had built when I was little. And some of the bigger challenges, money was always a concern. So my mom was pretty much the only provider. And it's so funny now because I remember growing up thinking, oh my gosh, we don't even have enough money for junk food. All the other kids get to have like Doritos, soda, Sunkist, and all that stuff, but it was too expensive. We ate everything that like came out of my grandparents' garden, or my dad killed because he was a hunter, or caught because he was a fisherman. So it was funny because that is now awesome because I didn't grow up eating junk. So that was kind of the biggest challenge was, just life, I guess. And even though I am athletic now, I wasn't quite as sporty back then. I played outside a lot, but there were just not a lot of opportunities for me to play sports so much. And I did try playing soccer, but knocked my glasses off my face. So I quit that.
You said, okay, my glasses are off. I got to go. Bye.
Yeah, I'm out.
Growing up, you've touched on addiction and alcoholism, to be specific. And I had a great idol that I looked up to growing up. It was my uncle. And he was a bodybuilder, and he got me in the gym. That's when I started falling in love with exercise. But I also watched alcoholism deteriorate him mentally and physically, leading him to the grave. And it just kills me every day thinking about it. But why don't you go into a little bit in depth about what went on with your family as far as addiction and what you learned as far as watching whatever happened in your life happen?
My dad was an alcoholic, and he's been sober now for over 5 years, 6 years, something like that. So it's really awesome. I have a relationship with him now. And back then, he wasn't abusive or anything like that. He just was not present. And you can imagine, like, maybe a little grumpy, because if he wasn't drunk, he was probably hungover.
Right.
So as an adult, though, I didn't realize until just a few years ago how important it is if you grew up in a household with an alcoholic parent or parents, how important it is as an adult to kind of uncover and unpack some of that stuff, because it seems that there's a common thing that happens with adult children of alcoholics. So I didn't really realize that I was kind of in the grips of that. In some ways, it made me a much stronger person and made me achieve a lot more. It wasn't like I was always striving for achievement just for achievement. I looked back and realized that I did have some abandonment issues, and I was trying to please people and like approval seeking and things like that. So I think that's really, really important. And that's kind of the message that I want to put out, because once you grew up in that environment, you can't change that, but you can change moving forward. So one of the other big things is that a lot of children who had alcoholic parents, we either become alcoholics or we marry them, or both.
Right.
And that played out a lot. I was married before, and my ex-husband ended up with a drinking problem. But having grown up in that kind of environment, I kept covering up for him. And so that wasn't healthy at all. And once I took care of all of that stuff, things really started to make sense. Life started to become better. But had I kind of known that going in, I think that I would have tolerated it much less time rather than how much I just maintained my uncomfortable life, because that's kind of what I was used to as a kid. Just make everything better, smooth it over, and it'll all be okay. It was easy for me, I guess, to do that, easier than it was to really make that change. Once I made that change, though, it's crazy to think that I would have lived in such a disruptive and unpredictable life.
Thing is with alcoholism is you can help as much as you want, but ultimately it boils down to the individual. I used to go with my uncle to AA meetings and he tried his best, but there was always somebody that he was associating with or something happened drastically in his life that just turned the wheel back to the negative side. But it's good to see that your dad, he recouped and looks like he's on the straight and narrow.
Oh, yeah, it's awesome. Like I said, it's great to have a relationship with him now. And you're right, there's only so much you can do. And that's one of the things that I think listeners listening to the show might really benefit from is recognizing when you're just kind of overplaying the overdeveloped sense of responsibility, because a lot of us athletes and high achievers are fixers too. Mm-hmm. So to understand, like, if some of that's coming out of your own just desire to achieve, but maybe some of it could be coming from that other place. So just recognizing it and knowing that you can't save everyone.
And Stephanie, the glasses get knocked off. You said forget soccer, but in high school, things changed a little bit. Why don't you go into that?
Yeah, so I did grow up in the country. I was playing a lot. I had mostly boy cousins, brothers. I kept up with all the boys. And so I was physically active. But then once I got to high school, really my main reason for getting involved in sports more was because I was also in marching band my freshman year in high school. And then the only way that my parents would let me quit marching band, because they didn't like me quitting anything, was that I had to replace it with something. And cross country practice happened to coincide with marching band practice, so I couldn't do that anymore. So I started running cross country. So I opted to go just run over doing marching band.
Did you flip a quarter and say, well, if I get heads, it's going to be marching band. If tails, I'm going to be running track?
I really just didn't want to do marching band anymore. And I was like, how can I get out of this?
Yeah, well, the thing is, too, you mentioned one thing that really sticks with me, and this is probably translated throughout your life. Your parents didn't let you quit. And that's big. And I think you get mad sometimes and maybe frustrated looking back. But when I was younger, I didn't stick with a lot of things. I would bail on things. And my parents, they're great, but they would be like, okay, that's fine. I don't have to pay for it anymore. And I don't have to take you that activity anymore. But I think that really helps you, especially being an entrepreneur.
Oh, if you don't have discipline, you'll fail as an entrepreneur. A lot of people get into entrepreneurship because they think that they have the freedom to do whatever they want.
No.
And you do. But
you do,
I mean, honestly,
yeah.
Like you go from working, which 12 hours of the day do I want to work?
Right. And speaking of working, in college, you worked 3 jobs and still managed to kick ass in triathlons. When did you realize that putting yourself through those tests in life made you stronger mentally? Or was it something else that occurred in your life that made you strong mentally?
It's kind of funny because, again, as an adult, I can kind of look back and see, but when I look at my grandparents, so I am fortunate enough, I'm almost 40, and I still have all 4 of my grandparents.
Oh,
and
nice.
Only one of them has retired, and even that is like a full-time job for him. And so I was predisposed to hard work
right.
and being a total beast. And I was in college and I didn't have a safety net. My parents didn't have money to give to me. And I knew that if I couldn't cut it on my own, I would maybe have to go back to Missouri
You're like,
and
no.
live with my parents. And that wasn't happening. So, I think I wasn't willing to fail, and I was willing to do whatever I needed to do to just make it work.
Well, my wife's the same way. She didn't want to live at home with her parents either, and she left the house at like 18 years old and never looked back. I think a lot of people, when they stick around with the parents for too long, they get strapped down and their motivation just goes out the window. But you got a hunger for knowledge, and it led you into the Navy as a nuclear engineer. Why don't you talk about that?
So you mentioned the 3 jobs and school full time. I was doing all of that and I was still having a hard time making ends meet. And so I was working as a lifeguard.
I did that as well.
Did you?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
so much fun, isn't it?
I loved it. It was the easiest job I ever had.
Yeah. So I was working as a lifeguard and I was struggling to make everything work. And a couple of the guys that I worked with had just actually been in the Coast Guard and they had been rescue swimmers. And
Okay.
I thought, wow, that sounds awesome. And so they said, well, but the Coast Guard's rescue swimmer school is like 3.5 year wait. Why don't you go talk to the Navy? They could probably get you in faster. And so I went to talk to a recruiter and he was like, oh, how about you take this little test here, which was the ASVAB. So it's an entrance exam. And I had actually been going to school to be an engineer. And so I had just taken all of those classes and I did really, really well on the exam. And then they started talking to me about the Navy's nuclear engineering program. And I thought, you're going to pay for me to go to school and give me a job. I was like, that's awesome. Sign me up. So that's kind of how I ended up there. They never mentioned rescue swimming ever again because, it's hard to recruit nukes. So that's how I ended up there, which is great because, like I said, I was going to school for engineering. And I think if I wouldn't have taken that route first before doing fitness stuff, I always would have wondered if I could have cut it.
How difficult was it to become a nuclear engineer?
That program is absolutely insane. I spent 40 hours a week in classroom, in instruction, same classroom, same 30 people. You can't leave to study because there's no studying in your room or anything like that because all of the material is classified. And then I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. I spent about between, 30 and 40 hours a week on top of the 40 hours a week studying. So I spent about 70 to 80 hours a week in that classroom learning the information. And the program is just over 2 years long. So it was pretty intense.
Now, switching gears a little bit, you said you had trouble or an unhealthy relationship with food at times throughout your life. Now, how did you redirect your mindset and conquer those cravings for food that so many people, including myself, I have these problems as well, deal with on a daily basis?
I really think that it was just one of my coping mechanisms because I think that I had a lot of anxiety and worry and things like that, just kind of based on how I grew up. Whenever you have that much on your plate, there's just a lot going on. And I think food was one of those things that I could just literally mindlessly meditate over. I would stand there and just eat peanut butter out of the jar, just at the end of the night, staring into the pantry. And it's almost meditative. Something else that really made sense to me was something I heard Tony Robbins say one time about how being really full, filling your stomach up to a really full level, it presses on your diaphragm. It forces you to have to breathe deeply. Mm-hmm. And so which is also relaxing. And so I was like, I kind of think I'm doing that where I love feeling full, but it's not necessarily the full feeling. It's those deep breaths that it forces you to take. So I started doing some deep breathing stuff. There's a really good book called Women, Food, and God that it just made sense to me in food, the relationship we have with food. And then the other piece too is, like I said, there was a lot of stress in my life from my ex-husband and everything that was happening there.
Yeah.
So I think once I removed a lot of those stressors, it really started to kind of balance out.
You talk about anxiety, and I've dealt with anxiety for a long time. Did you have anxiety because maybe you were looking too far ahead? You said you had a lot of things on your mind. Were you foreshadowing? And even though the outcome might not be what you thought it was going to be, but in your mind, you're like, oh, you have the worst case scenario.
I think maybe part of that, but if you've ever been in a relationship, so my dad was the alcoholic growing up, and then turned out that my husband, not my current, there's this constant uneasy feeling.
Yeah.
Something's not right. And so it kind of permeates into all aspects of your life. But even in that period in between, after I'd moved out of my parents' house and before my now ex-husband started drinking too much, there was the unease about just school and things like that. So I just kept filling my plate more and more and more with these super hard things that I would worry about, and as a nuclear engineer, you're pretty terrified that you're going to mess something up.
Yeah.
And there's no room for error. It's a very, very, very high stress job because you can't mess it up. So, I think I just went from an anxiety-ridden state growing up, and then I jumped right into it as an adult. I was like, oh, here, stress me out more. So I think that's part of it. And I don't know that I was ever worried about the future so much as I don't want to screw it up.
Yeah, because I remember being a firefighter and we'd be going on these calls and I'd be pumping the truck, and you really can't mess up as far as delivering water to the guys inside fighting the fire. So I can relate to a certain degree, and that's where I got a lot of my anxiety, because you just wanted to be perfect all the time, and sometimes that just isn't the case. But you transitioned from endurance-based sports to competing in the WBFF and numerous fitness pageants as well. What did you learn about yourself during those experiences?
The biggest thing that I learned there was switching over to a sport that is purely subjective from all the other sports and engineering that is objective. So that was a big kind of life lesson for me. I thought something that kind of rounded me out, because as an engineer, as an endurance person, as somebody who goes by the numbers, it's pretty black and white. There's really not much gray. And that's a harder way to live life too, if everything has to be black and white, because you feel like you're always bumping up against things. So the subjectivity of the physique competitions, it really taught me that as long as I did my best, That's all I could ever ask of myself, because what it comes down to is somebody else's decision. And I knew if I went in there knowing that, I didn't cheat on my diet, I didn't skip workouts, that kind of thing, if I brought my total package, that's all I could ask of myself.
Yeah, you couldn't be too hard on yourself, especially with the judging. And you just got to take it with a grain of salt sometimes. Like you said, if you know you did a good job, what else can you do? Endurance, energy, strength, and focus is what I need. Hocus pocus. Yes, my dear sister. FlexZone Preflex contains caffeine anhydrous, taurine, and L-norberline, to name a few, that helps us soar through the air with ease on our brooms. This witch's brew is for our taste buds only. If anyone else wants a taste, they need to head to FlexZone Subs and place their order today. And don't forget to enter promo code STORM15 to get 15% off your purchase.
Green apple and blueberries are yummy to my tummy.
Hi, I'm Don Varney. I'm a motivational speaker, and I entered the Flex Zone.
And we go to the corporate grind, right? Why don't you talk about the corporate grind in your life, the commute to work, being around the cubicle, and finally saying, well, enough is enough.
Yeah, so after I was in the Navy as an engineer, I worked as a software systems engineer for a defense contractor. And yeah, it was I think part of the frustration for me is just too many hours sitting. And so to be in that technical spot, you're really spending a ton of time behind the computer. And as much as I work out, it's just tough.
It's like being in prison.
Yeah, exactly. And so add that 2.5 hour commute in the car. It's not like I was on a train or something I could read or sleep.
Right.
You add that in there, that was just a lot. And I actually kind of thought that I would start my own contracting firm. I had been looking into that. And then I was like, I really love fitness. Let me take a shot at it. So it's been over 6 years since I launched my business. And it all started out mostly online. Now I've been training people in person because I wanted to get out from behind the computer some. So it's been great. I just have a lot of flexibility and freedom in it.
You say you got to have a little crazy in you to jump into entrepreneurship, and I can relate with my voiceover business because nothing happens overnight. Like you said, 6 years you've been doing this, and it takes a while, and it takes making connections. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing with even my business is, I did fitness competitions for 5 years leading up to launching my business, and social media was already around. And so I was already sharing my fitness stuff just as a hobby. So I really started building my brand 5 years in advance of even starting my business. So that's something that a lot of people, maybe they want to jump into something, but you really have to build that equity before you can just do it. And you can just do it, but just be patient with it. It doesn't just happen overnight. I actually have a friend who, she was like, oh, it just seems like you and your husband, you just wake up and you eat breakfast and you just go work out and then you go about your day. And I'm like, well, cause it's not interesting to talk about the day-to-day stuff and the computer time and things like that.
You're just drinking a cup of coffee going, oh, it's such a wonderful life. We live so grand. Yeah, it doesn't happen like that all the time. It takes a lot of work. And why don't you touch on your business, SK Fit Life, skfitlife.com. And the saying is, you need to stop chasing skinny, right?
Yeah, so that's the business I launched a little over 6 years ago. And my message is life begins when you stop chasing skinny, because I used to over-exercise and overeat, and then over-exercise and then overeat. And I was really just chasing skinny. And if I would have just slowed everything down, I could have broken that cycle sooner. So that's kind of one of my goals with coaching my clients, is to break that cycle of the over-exercise, or maybe need to over-exercise, and the overeating. Because I'm happier now. I don't work out nearly as much as I ever used to. Everything's way more balanced, and it really comes down to being happy too, but that's a whole thing in itself, right? That's a whole journey in itself.
Right. You totally got to find your own happiness. And I think a lot of times too, when I was working out like all the time, if I missed a day, it would get into my head like, oh, you can't miss a day. You got to keep going. You're going to lose all the muscle you gained. Did you ever have that issue?
So I've actually struggled with adrenal fatigue, very serious adrenal fatigue and total burnout. And I actually gained 50 pounds in 4 months one time. After my very first season of doing fitness competitions, the coach that was coaching me, she was not actually paying attention to anything that I said to her as far as pictures go.
Great coach.
And I got down to, so I'm 5'9". If you look at any of my pictures right now, I'm about like 145 to 149, around there.
Okay.
I got down to 119 pounds. So my adrenals were completely shot. And right after that, I couldn't stop eating. I was just extremely exhausted. So even now, with my clients, I coach a lot of busy moms, professionals, people who have a lot of stuff on their plates. And I'm really cognizant of adrenal fatigue. If you are working out every day of the week, or if you feel compelled to work out every single day of the week, you can't seem to lose weight and you're tired all the time, there's something else going on there. And having a coach just tell you just to keep doing more is not always the right. Actually, if that's your situation,
it's like a drill instructor. Keep going, private. You can't keep going. You got to take a break from time to time. Yeah, because if it's not making you happy, then it's not fun anymore. And you had your own podcast, and I like to pick the brain of other podcasters out there. Tell me about your podcast, and are you still running your podcast, by the way?
This past year has been just really, really insanely busy. Actually, the past year and a half. My husband and I, he's in the Coast Guard, and we moved here to San Diego from Charleston, South Carolina. So 2016, we moved here. So you move, you get everything set up. I started training clients in person, and so that kept taking a front seat. And then last year, we got married. We had 2 wedding ceremonies. I was on all those TV shows.
Yeah.
And it's just not been a priority. So I recently found a new editor who's going to edit my shows for me, because that was kind of the sticking point, was actually doing the editing piece. It's been great. I love being able to get a message out there. But yeah, it's kind of been put on the back burner.
So you edited your own shows. Explain to the FlexZone fanatics how, if you want your show to sound perfect or nearly close to perfect, how much time it takes.
And then to try to outsource it and not be happy with the result, you're like, oh, that's it. I'm doing it. I'm just going to do it myself.
Yeah, because I'll sit and edit shows. Sometimes it takes me 5 hours, but the final product, like you say, working out, the final product is what really gets you going. It makes me happy when I can complete the show and spread the word from my guests out to the masses. You've been a fitness model, and you've been on the cover of magazines, and you've been in magazines. If somebody's wanting to get into fitness modeling, what do they need to do?
Oh, you just sit back and wait for people to come to you. I'm just kidding.
Magically. Woo.
Just kidding. So that takes a lot of networking. You have to constantly be self-promoting. You have to reach out to people. You have to have more of a story than I'm pretty. There's lots of pretty people out there. I don't know if you've looked on Instagram.
Oh my God. Look at my abs. Look at them.
Right. So having a story, having something else that the magazines find value in for their readers. The other thing too really is building that influence. And I don't mean go buy followers, because that's so obvious.
Right.
But actually having a genuine influence on people. And I hesitate to say fitness model, because I feel like that has a whole array of images that puts in people's mind, and some of them I'm not too fond of. But I really would rather be a model of fitness.
I like that.
Fitness model, you have the title right. It's just that it's a little on the slutty side these days.
Right. I do like model of fitness. That sounds perfect. Yeah.
So have something to actually add value, because just posting a bunch of pictures of your hot body doesn't necessarily add value to the world.
I haven't been into a gym lately. I work out in my garage and I work out at the park. But I imagine now that you go to the gym and everybody's filming themselves working out, I don't see how anybody gets anything done.
Oh, you're not kidding.
So that is real. Wow. So now is the moment to seize your opportunity at greatness. Why do so many people wave the white flag and accept their fate with the "it is what it is" mentality?
Because it's hard to keep going. Things go wrong and you do want to give up. Believe me, I've wanted to give up on a bunch of stuff. But at the end, how are you going to feel about that? I said in the beginning of the show, I'm glad that I did the engineering stuff already, because I think that I would have always wondered, could I have cut it? But I did it, and I did it for about 11 years. And, I wanted to quit that too, but but I didn't. So yeah, so you just have to keep going, and quitting isn't going to get you any closer to your goal, you know. And
No.
a lot of people will start and stop and start and stop. And I mean, at the end, like if you just would have been consistent, you would have gotten much further ahead.
Now, since you're a coach and you help people get into better shape and become models of fitness, what would you say to the person that always comes up with excuses?
This is a great question. The answer is you either do it or you don't. So all those things that you say to yourself in your head, well, what about this? Well, I don't feel like that. Well, I should have done this. Well, all that stuff, just shut the voice down. You either do it or you don't. I mean, that's what it comes down to. A lot of people, they want to complicate things. It doesn't need to be complex. You either do it or you don't do it.
Right. Now, what is high-intensity sports-specific training, and how can it benefit an individual both mentally and physically?
High-intensity interval training, but it depends on what your sport is. So depending on if you want to be a better runner and you have a specific time, say a mile and a half for like military tests or something, right? You're going to do a high-intensity interval training, but it's going to be sport-specific. So your intervals are going to be a little bit different. If you want to, I don't know, train for like Broken Skull Challenge, you want to come up with some different high intensity interval training stuff, but in the sport specific arena being that explosive movement, that kind of thing. So training for like Broken Skull Challenge would be different than training for, say, a mile and a half.
Okay, and that leads us to our When It Rains, It Pours question of the show. This segment is brought to you by FlexZoneSups.com. Enter in promo code STORM15 and you get 15% off your purchase. Now, you've been featured on Stone Cold Steve Austin's Broken Skull Challenge, Tough Mudder X, American Ninja Warrior, and Spartan Ultimate Team Challenge. Which show do you feel was the most beneficial? And are there any stories that you wouldn't mind sharing with the FlexZone fanatics?
Oh, my all-time favorite was Stone Cold Steve Austin's Broken Skull Challenge. It's funny because, again, I grew up with boys and they always watched wrestling, and then we, of course, reenacted it. So
Yeah.
I grew up watching Steve Austin and maybe pretending like I was him or something. I don't know. So it wasn't really up my alley necessarily. When I applied, my husband applied, and then the producers reached out to me. And so it was really out of my comfort zone. And I didn't have any hand-to-hand combat experience, but I thought, yeah, why not? And it was just such a neat experience to get to do something like that because, like I said, I don't do combative sports myself. So I don't know, maybe I'll start. It was fun. But when you watch the episode, I was on episode 2 of season 5. So they have to kind of cut it down for television's sake. And so it ends up being a little less than 3 minutes on TV, but we wrestled for like 7 minutes. And
Wow.
It was exhausting. It was 104 degrees out in the desert where we filmed. So the air, you can imagine how hard. I was in water, but you can imagine how the lungs were burning from that super dry heat. And it was just a really awesome experience. And the funniest part was when we were told that we were going to be on the show, first of all, they're very last minute of letting you know you're going to be there. And so you like get a day or so's notice to be there.
Wow.
And then they're very strict and they say, do not talk to the other contestants. Well, I was in the military. If you're told not to talk, you don't talk. Right?
Yeah.
So I get there and I'm completely silent, but everybody else is talking. And I was like, they're talking. And so anyway, I was very quiet, which, you know, was good because I wanted to stay in the zone. But everybody else around me were like giggling. I mean, it was pretty funny because you're there to wrestle and fight and stuff, and they're giggling.
Wow. Stephanie, it's been great having you on Enter the Flex Zone. Do you have any shout outs you want to make before I let you go?
I'll give a shout out to my crazy dogs. I also foster for pit bull rescue. And so those things give me the most exercise you could possibly imagine. You want to talk about some motivation there.
All right, Flex Zone fanatics, I want to thank Stephanie Siraco for coming on ETFZ this week. You can follow her on social media at her websites, stephaniesiraco.com and skfitlife.com. And she's Stephanie Siraco on Google+, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And on Twitter, it's skfitlife. Give her a follow to keep up with what's going on in her life. Also, guys, check out FlexZone Sups on Instagram at FlexZone Sups, and FlexZoneSups.com is the website. Enter in promo code STORM15 on FlexZoneSups.com, and you get 15% off your purchase. Having a dream is one thing. However, turning that dream into a reality takes a never say die attitude and a ton of discipline. Stephanie understood that if she wanted to better her life, she had to stay true to the path and deal with the pressure situations she was constantly involved in. Stephanie has faced much adversity throughout her life, but one thing remains true. It's the fact that she recognizes her problems and rises to each and every occasion, never looking back. Now is the moment to seize your opportunity. Do you have the discipline to do what it takes? I'm Brad Storm. You guys can follow me on social media at Brad Storm Lanou on Instagram, Brad Storm VO on Twitter, Brad Lanou on YouTube, and my business, Voices of the Storm Recording, on Facebook. And we're on all your favorite apps right now. We're on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, and Stitcher. And if you leave a review on iTunes, I'm going to pick one out every week and read it out loud on the show. And speaking of which, this one comes from Exec Life CEO. I want to thank Brad first for having me on the Enter the Flex Zone podcast. Thank you for having me to talk about my story and Exec Life. It was truly an awesome experience. I love hearing all the different stories on this podcast channel. Can't thank you enough. I look forward to hearing more and being back for another interview. Tune in, everyone, and listen to Enter the Flex Zone. I want to say thank you to Andrew Calloway for that awesome review, and go check out Exec Life, get some apparel for yourself, and live the Exec Life. Well, Flex Zone fanatics, that wraps up another great show. And as you know, it's time to clench the fist and punch every day in the face. And I'll see you the next time we enter the Flex Zone.